The dog visits the grave for more than 2 years. Police officer opens it, and what he discovers is terrifying. The morning mist clung to the weathered tombstones of Savannah Cemetery like a protective veil, creating an ethereal atmosphere that matched the peculiar scene unfolding before Karen Whitfield's eyes. For the 100th time, she watched as Buddy, a golden retriever with intelligent eyes and graying muzzle, made his way through the serpentine paths between the graves, his destination unwavering. The dog's routine had become legendary among Savannah's residents. Every morning, precisely as the church bells tolled 8 times, Buddy would appear at the cemetery gates, his fur catching the early sunlight. He would then make his way to the same spot, a relatively new gravestone bearing the name Alexis Coldwell. Karen had first noticed Buddy's ritual 6 months ago when she began her morning walks through the cemetery grounds. As a local journalist for the Savannah Herald, she had always been drawn to unique stories, but there was something about this one that tugged at her heart in an unexpected way. Today was different, though. As Karen observed from her usual bench, Buddy's behavior had changed. Instead of lying peacefully by the grave as he normally did, the dog was pawing at the earth with unusual urgency, whimpering softly as he dug. "He's been doing that for the past week." A gravelly voice startled Karen from her thoughts. Joseph Matthews, the elderly cemetery caretaker, stood beside her bench, leaning on his well-worn rake. 2 years of visiting every day, calm as can be, and now this. He shook his head, puzzlement evident in his weathered features. Karen's journalistic instincts tingled. 2 years since the funeral. "That's right," Joseph nodded, his eyes fixed on Buddy. "Started the very day they buried her. Strange thing is, I don't remember him from before. Never saw him with the Coldwells during the service." The mention of the Coldwell family sparked Karen's memory. The story had been all over the local news. The tragic accident at the old Victorian mansion on Cedar Street, the mysterious circumstances, and the hasty funeral that followed. The details had always seemed oddly vague to her professional mind. Rising from the bench, Karen approached the grave slowly, careful not to startle Buddy. The dog's head snapped up, his amber eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her pause. There was something almost human in that gaze, a mixture of intelligence and desperation that sent a shiver down her spine. "It's okay, boy," she murmured softly, taking another step forward. To her surprise, Buddy didn't growl or back away as he did with most visitors. Instead, he wagged his tail once, then resumed his digging with renewed vigor. Karen knelt beside the grave, mindful of the freshly disturbed earth. The granite headstone was simple yet elegant, bearing the inscription, "Alexis Coldwell, beloved daughter, forever in our hearts." Below the dates, something caught her eye, a small engraving of a butterfly, weathered beyond its years. Running her fingers over the etched butterfly, Karen noticed that the stone felt different here, smoother, newer. "Mr. Matthews," she called out, "does this look like a recent addition to you?" The caretaker hobbled over, squinting at the area she indicated. "Now that's peculiar," he muttered. "That butterfly wasn't there last month. I'd stake my job on it." Karen's pulse quickened as she pulled out her phone, quickly searching through the cemetery's online database. Her eyes widened as she read the entry for Alexis's plot. According to the records, the grave had been purchased the day before the accident, a detail that seemed more than coincidental. As she stood up, brushing dirt from her knees, Buddy suddenly stopped digging. The dog's ears perked up, and he tilted his head as if listening to a distant sound. Without warning, he darted off between the graves, disappearing into the morning mist. "He'll be back," Joseph said with certainty. "He always comes back." But Karen barely heard him. Her mind was racing, connecting dots she hadn't even known existed until now. Why would someone purchase a grave plot before an accident? Why would a dog she'd never seen before suddenly appear at the funeral and maintain such faithful vigilance? And most intriguingly, why would someone modify the headstone 2 years after the fact? As she watched Buddy's golden form fade into the distance, Karen made a decision. There was more to Alexis Coldwell's story than a tragic accident and a loyal dog. Something about this entire situation felt orchestrated, planned, and Karen was determined to uncover the truth, no matter where it led. The morning mist began to lift, revealing the sprawling cemetery in its full Southern Gothic glory. Spanish moss swayed gently from ancient oak trees, and in the distance, a mockingbird began to sing. Karen pulled out her notebook and began to write, unaware that her simple morning observation was about to lead her into one of the most extraordinary stories of her career. The Coldwell mansion stood like an aging duchess among the historic homes of Savannah's prestigious Cedar Street. Its wraparound porch, adorned with delicate Victorian trim, spoke of bygone elegance, but Karen noticed signs of recent neglect: peeling paint, overgrown roses, and shutters hanging slightly askew. As she walked up the creaking steps, Karen recalled her phone conversation with Fernanda Coldwell from the previous evening. The woman had seemed surprised by her request for an interview about Alexis, but agreed with an eagerness that suggested she'd been waiting for someone to ask. The door opened before Karen could knock, revealing Fernanda Coldwell, a striking woman in her early 50s, whose grace couldn't quite mask the sadness in her eyes. "Miss Whitfield," she smiled, extending her hand. "Please, come in." The interior of the house felt frozen in time. Family photographs lined the walls, and Karen couldn't help but notice that in many of them, Alexis's face seemed to be studying something just beyond the camera's view. She had been beautiful, with intelligent green eyes and a confident smile that hinted at hidden depths. "Tea?" Fernanda offered, leading Karen into a sunroom that overlooked a neglected garden. "It's jasmine, Alexis's favorite." "Thank you," Karen accepted, settling into a vintage armchair. "Mrs. Coldwell, I appreciate you meeting with me. I know this must be difficult." Fernanda's hands trembled slightly as she poured the tea. "Actually, I'm glad you've come. There's something comforting about discussing Alexis, especially now." "Now?" Karen probed gently. "The anniversary is approaching," Fernanda explained, her voice softening. 2 years since the accident. Mark, my husband, he can't bear to talk about it. He's thrown himself into his work at the company, barely comes home anymore." Karen nodded sympathetically, taking out her notebook. "I understand this might be sensitive, but could you tell me about the day of the accident?" A shadow crossed Fernanda's face. "It's strange. There's so much about that day I can't quite remember clearly." Alexis had been acting differently in the weeks before. She spent hours in Mark's home office, going through old company records. She said she was helping him organize things, but Fernanda paused, twisting her wedding ring. She seemed worried about something. "Did she tell you what was bothering her?" "No, but the night before," Fernanda's voice caught. "She came to my room very late. She was crying. Said something about protecting the family, about things not being what they seemed. I thought she was just stressed about her new position at her father's company. The next morning, she was gone, and then the accident." Karen leaned forward. "Mrs. Coldwell, I need to ask you something unusual. Did Alexis ever own a dog? A golden retriever, perhaps?" Fernanda looked startled. "No, never. She loved animals, but was allergic to dogs." "Why do you ask?" Before Karen could respond, a deep voice interrupted from the doorway. "What's this about?" Mark Coldwell stood there, his imposing figure filling the frame. Despite the casual weekend attire, he carried himself with the authority of a man accustomed to command. His expression, however, showed cracks in that facade: exhaustion, worry, and something else Karen couldn't quite identify. "Mr. Coldwell." Karen stood. "I'm Karen Whitfield from the Savannah Herald. I was just asking your wife about my daughter," he cut in, his tone sharp. "Why?" "I'm working on a story about unique local traditions," Karen explained smoothly, noting how Mark's shoulders tensed at her words. "There's a dog that visits Alexis's grave every day. I thought the family might know something about it." Mark's reaction was subtle but unmistakable, a quick intake of breath, a slight widening of the eyes. "A dog," he repeated, his voice carefully controlled. "No, we don't know anything about that. And I'd prefer if you didn't disturb my wife with these questions. The past should remain in the past." But as Mark turned to leave, Karen noticed something that made her pulse quicken. On his desk, visible through the study door, sat a manila envelope, and peeking out from it was the corner of what appeared to be a photograph, one that showed a familiar golden retriever. Fernanda must have noticed her gaze because she quickly changed the subject, asking about Karen's work at the newspaper. But throughout the rest of the conversation, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she had stumbled upon something much bigger than a simple story about a loyal dog. As she left the Coldwell mansion, Karen's phone buzzed with a text from Joseph Matthews, the cemetery caretaker. "You need to see this. Buddy found something." Attached was a photo that made Karen stop in her tracks. In the freshly dug earth beside Alexis's grave lay a tarnished locket, its surface engraved with the same butterfly design from the headstone. The pieces were beginning to fall into place, but the picture they formed made less sense with each new discovery. One thing was certain: the Coldwells knew more than they were telling, and Buddy was somehow the key to unlocking their secrets. Karen glanced back at the mansion, just in time to see a curtain fall back into place in an upper window. Someone had been watching her leave, and she had a feeling her visit had set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Savannah Cemetery as Karen hurried through its winding paths. Joseph Matthews waited by Alexis's grave, his weathered hands carefully holding the discovered locket. Buddy sat alertly beside him, his tail thumping against the ground when he spotted Karen. "It's authentic, all right," Joseph said as Karen approached, handing her the piece of jewelry. "Victorian era by the looks of it. Been in the ground a while, but not 2 years. The tarnish isn't deep enough." Karen turned the locket over in her hands, studying its intricate design. The butterfly engraving matched the one on the headstone perfectly, down to the smallest detail. Her fingers found the clasp, and with gentle pressure, it sprung open. Inside was a small photograph, faded but still clear enough to make out the images. On one side was a much younger Fernanda Coldwell, holding a baby that must have been Alexis. On the other side, however, was something far more intriguing, a handwritten sequence of numbers carefully etched into the metal. "Look at this," Karen pointed to the numbers. 7 to 15 to 22, 9 to 14, 7. "Could be a date." Joseph shook his head. "Too many numbers, might be coordinates or a code," Karen finished, her journalist's instincts firing. She quickly photographed the locket from every angle, making sure to capture the sequence clearly. "But why would someone bury a coded message by Alexis's grave?" Buddy whined softly, pawing at the ground near where the locket had been found. Karen knelt beside him, examining the disturbed earth more closely. Something glinted in the soil. A small key, modern and unremarkable except for a distinctive blue tag attached to it. "Savannah Bank and Trust." Karen read the tag's fading text. "Wait a minute." She pulled out her phone, quickly scrolling through her notes from the morning's interview. Fernanda mentioned that Alexis spent time going through her father's records. What if she found something in those documents? Joseph's expression grew serious. "Miss Whitfield, there's something else you should know." He glanced around before continuing, his voice low. "Yesterday, while making my rounds, I saw Mr. Coldwell here at the grave. He was alone, looking for something. When he saw me, he left in quite a hurry." Karen's mind raced with possibilities. He knew about the locket. That's why he was so upset when I mentioned the dog. He knew Buddy might find it. Just then, her phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from an anonymous address, containing only a single line. "Check the butterfly's shadow at sunset. Some secrets can only be seen in the right light." As if on cue, the setting sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow across the cemetery. Karen watched in amazement as the light hit the butterfly engraving on Alexis's headstone at just the right angle, revealing something she hadn't noticed before. Tiny marks, almost invisible unless viewed in this specific light. Pulling out her phone again, she carefully photographed the marks. They appeared to be more numbers, similar to the sequence in the locket, but different. Another piece of the puzzle, but what was it all leading to? "Mr. Matthews," Karen turned to the caretaker. "Do you have access to the cemetery's old records? I need to verify something about when this plot was purchased." Joseph nodded slowly. "Follow me to my office, but Miss Whitfield," he hesitated, "be careful. Last week someone broke into the records room, nothing was taken, but the files about the Coldwell plot had been disturbed." As they walked to the office, Buddy suddenly lifted his head, ears perked. Without warning, he dashed off between the graves, disappearing into the growing darkness. Karen had noticed this behavior before. It was as if the dog was responding to some call that only he could hear. In Joseph's small office, Karen examined the cemetery records while he prepared coffee. The file for Alexis's plot contained standard documentation, but something caught her eye: the signature on the purchase agreement. It was dated the day before the accident, but the handwriting. This isn't Mark Coldwell's signature, Karen realized, comparing it to a photo of business documents she'd found online. It's Alexis's. She bought her own grave. The implications of this discovery sent a chill down Karen's spine. Why would a young woman purchase a burial plot the day before her supposed accident? And what secrets had she encoded in the numbers left behind? As darkness fell outside, Karen's phone buzzed again. Another anonymous email. The truth lies in the butterfly's flight. Follow it before time runs out. Attached was a photo that made Karen's heart skip a beat. It showed Alexis Coldwell, dated just 1 month ago, standing in front of a familiar building, Savannah Bank and Trust. In her hand was a small blue key tag, identical to the one they'd just found. The pieces were there, but they painted a picture that seemed impossible. Unless, Karen thought back to Fernanda's words about Alexis's strange behavior before her disappearance, about protecting the family. What if the accident wasn't an accident at all? What if it was a carefully orchestrated disappearance? As she left the cemetery that night, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. In the distance, a dog barked, not Buddy's familiar sound, but a warning. Tomorrow she would visit Savannah Bank and Trust, following the trail of breadcrumbs that Alexis seemed to have left behind. But first, she needed to decode those numbers, and she knew just who might be able to help. The truth was unraveling, one thread at a time, and Karen was beginning to suspect that Alexis Coldwell's story was far from over. The morning sun had barely touched the marble columns of Savannah Bank and Trust when Karen arrived, clutching both the mysterious key and a decoded message in her hands. She'd spent half the night working with her old college professor, Dr. Eleanor Wright, a specialist in cryptography, to crack the code from the locket. It's a simple substitution cipher, Dr. Wright had explained, her eyes lighting up with excitement, but brilliant in its execution. Each number corresponds to a letter, creating geographical coordinates. The decoded message led to this very bank, but more specifically, to something inside it. As Karen entered the historic building, her mind wandered to the late-night conversation with the professor. Whoever created this wanted it to be solved, Dr. Wright had mused, but only by someone who knew what to look for. The butterfly isn't just decoration, it's a key to understanding the cipher itself. The bank's interior was all polished brass and rich mahogany, a testament to old money and older secrets. Karen approached the service desk, where a young woman with a nameplate reading Sarah greeted her with a practiced smile. "Welcome to Savannah Bank and Trust. How may I assist you today?" Karen placed the key on the counter. "I need to access a safety deposit box." Sarah's smile faltered slightly as she examined the key. "This is unusual. This key belongs to our old system. We upgraded our security 2 years ago." She typed something into her computer, frowning. "The box number matches one in our legacy system, but it's listed as abandoned." "Abandoned?" Karen leaned forward. "Show us what happens to the contents. Policy requires we maintain abandoned boxes for 5 years before attempting to contact the owner." Sarah consulted her screen again. This particular box was last accessed on April 15th, 2 years ago. Karen's heart skipped a beat, the day before Alexis's supposed accident. "I have documentation proving my right to access this box," Karen said, pulling out the papers she'd prepared. Among them was a copy of her press credentials and, more importantly, a letter she'd convinced Fernanda Coldwell to sign that morning, authorizing her to investigate on the family's behalf. Sarah examined the documents carefully before nodding. "Please follow me." The safety deposit vault was a windowless room lined with metal boxes of varying sizes. Sarah led Karen to a box, marked with the number that matched her key. "I'll give you some privacy," she said, leaving Karen alone in the vault. With trembling fingers, Karen inserted the key. Inside the box, she found a sealed envelope and a small leather-bound journal. The envelope contained a letter, dated 2 years ago, written in Alexis's elegant handwriting. To whoever has solved the puzzle, if you're reading this, you followed the breadcrumbs I left behind. The butterfly was always my mother's symbol for transformation, fitting given what I've discovered. What I'm about to share will change everything. But first, you need to understand why. In the journal, you'll find the truth about Aldridge Technologies, merger with Coldwell Industries. My father isn't the man he appears to be, but neither is he the villain in this story. He's being manipulated, forced to participate in something that could destroy not just our family, but countless others. I had to disappear to protect them all, to find proof from the outside. The accident was staged, a necessary deception. Buddy was my father's gift to me when I was a child, but I could never keep him because of my allergies. He stayed with my grandmother instead. Now, he's my only connection to my old life, my way of keeping watch. There's more to find. Follow the coordinates in my journal, but be careful, you're not the only one looking. Alexis. Karen's hands shook as she opened the journal. Inside, she found detailed notes about corporate transactions, encrypted messages, and a series of coordinates leading to locations across Savannah. But what caught her attention was a pressed butterfly on the final page, along with another coded message. Before she could examine it further, she heard footsteps approaching the vault. Quickly, she photographed the journal's pages and placed everything back in the box, except for one small piece of paper that had fallen to the floor unnoticed. Sarah reappeared, looking apologetic. "I'm sorry, but we're closing the vault for routine maintenance." As Karen left the bank, her mind was racing. The pieces were starting to fit together. Alexis hadn't perished in an accident. She'd orchestrated her own disappearance. But why? What had she discovered about her father's company that was so dangerous? The piece of paper from the vault provided another clue, a series of numbers similar to the ones in the locket, but this time accompanied by a small sketch of a lighthouse. Karen recognized it immediately. The historic Tybee Island lighthouse, just outside Savannah. Her phone buzzed with a text from Joseph Matthews. "Buddy's acting strange again. Found something else by the grave. You need to see this." As she hailed a taxi, Karen glanced back at the bank. In a second-floor window, she caught a glimpse of a familiar figure, Mark Coldwell, watching her departure with an unreadable expression. The game of cat and mouse was escalating, and Karen was no longer sure which role she was playing. The taxi pulled away from the curb, and Karen noticed something else, a golden retriever watching from across the street, before disappearing down an alley. Buddy was never far away, it seemed, guiding her through this labyrinth of secrets, one clue at a time. The Tybee Island lighthouse stood sentinel against the afternoon sky, its black and white stripes a stark contrast to the gathering storm clouds. Karen pulled her jacket tighter as she climbed the winding path, the coordinates from Alexis's journal fresh in her mind. Behind her, Buddy trotted faithfully. He'd appeared as soon as she'd arrived on the island, as if expecting her. The old lighthouse keeper, Thomas Green, met her at the entrance. His weathered face crinkled with recognition when she mentioned Alexis's name. "Ah, the Coldwell girl. Smart one, she was. Used to come here often, especially in those last few weeks." "What did she do here?" Karen asked, following him up the spiral staircase. "Research," she said. "Something about old shipping records. Spent hours in the archive room." He paused at a landing, catching his breath. Strange thing was, she seemed more interested in recent records than historical ones, particularly anything connected to the deep water port projects. The archive room was a small circular space near the top of the lighthouse, its walls lined with filing cabinets and shelves. Through the windows, Karen could see the massive cargo ships entering Savannah's port in the distance. "Here's where she usually worked," Thomas indicated a desk beneath a window. "Left some things behind, actually. Never came back for them after." "Well, you know." He pulled out a keyring and opened a drawer, retrieving a weathered leather portfolio. "Found this the day after. Was going to give it to her father, but something told me to wait." Karen's heart raced as she opened the portfolio. Inside were documents about Coldwell Industries' port development projects, but what caught her attention were the handwritten notes in the margins. Alexis had been tracking something, shipments, dates, and what appeared to be discrepancies in the company's environmental impact reports. "Mr. Green, did Alexis ever mention Aldridge Technologies?" Karen asked, remembering the company name from the bank documents. The old man's expression changed subtly. Not directly, but there was a man who came to see her here once. They argued. "I remember, because it was so out of character. She was usually so composed." He kept saying something about Project Chrysalis and how she didn't understand what was at stake. Karen's fingers traced the butterfly symbol embossed on the portfolio's cover. Chrysalis, the transformative stage of a butterfly. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Buddy suddenly growled, his attention fixed on the stairwell. Footsteps echoed from below, growing closer. Thomas quickly took the portfolio from Karen's hands and slid it behind a loose panel in the wall. "The back stairs," he whispered urgently. "Quick!" Karen and Buddy slipped through a maintenance door just as two men in business suits entered the archive room. Through the crack in the door, she recognized one of them, Robert Aldridge, CEO of Aldridge Technologies, whose photo she'd seen in her research. "It has to be here somewhere." Aldridge's voice was tense. "Her notes, her evidence, everything she collected about Project Chrysalis. We can't risk anyone else finding it." "The girl was thorough," the other man replied. "If she left anything behind, it'll be well hidden." Karen held her breath, watching as they began searching the room. Beside her, Buddy remained perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the men through the gap. The search was interrupted by Thomas's return. "Gentlemen," his voice carried an authority that belied his age, "this area is restricted without proper authorization." Aldridge smoothed his tie, composing himself. "Of course, we're with the Historical Society, doing research on the lighthouse's role in modern maritime commerce." "Funny," Thomas replied dryly. "I don't recall any appointment with the Historical Society today." After a tense moment, the men left, their footsteps fading down the stairs. Karen waited several minutes before emerging from hiding, her mind racing with questions. "They've been here before," Thomas said quietly, retrieving the portfolio from its hiding place. "Different men, same purpose, always searching, never finding." Karen opened the portfolio again, this time noticing something she'd missed, a small USB drive hidden in the spine. "Mr. Green, may I borrow this? I promise to return it." The old man nodded. "Take it. But be careful, Miss Whitfield. Some truths are dangerous not because they're hidden, but because of who wants them to stay that way." As Karen descended the lighthouse steps, the storm finally broke. Rain pelted the windows, and lightning illuminated the churning sea. She clutched the portfolio close, knowing she held pieces of a puzzle that had forced Alexis Coldwell to abandon her entire life. Her phone buzzed, another anonymous email. "The butterfly emerges when the time is right. Watch for the signal at sunset." Attached was a photo of a familiar building near the port, its windows reflecting the orange glow of sunset. In one of those windows, barely visible, was a butterfly decal, identical to the one on Alexis's grave. Karen looked down at Buddy, who stared back with knowing eyes. "Lead the way, boy," she whispered. Take me to her." The rain intensified as they made their way back to the car, but Karen barely noticed. She was too focused on what she'd found and what it meant. Project Chrysalis wasn't just about corporate dealings. It was about transformation, about emerging from darkness into light, just like Alexis had done. But as lightning split the sky again, Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't the only one following this trail of butterflies. The race to find Alexis was accelerating, and time was running out. The rain continued to pour as Karen sat in her home office, staring at her laptop screen. The USB drive from the lighthouse contained dozens of folders, each meticulously organized with Alexis's characteristic attention to detail. But it was the file named Butterfly Effect that had kept her awake for the past 3 hours. "A Project Chrysalis isn't what they claim," Alexis had written in a document dated just days before her disappearance. "The environmental impact studies have been altered. The real data shows catastrophic consequences for the coastal ecosystem, thousands of jobs at risk, entire communities affected. Dad doesn't know the full scope, They're using his company's reputation to push this through. Karen rubbed her tired eyes, scrolling through spreadsheets and technical documents. Aldridge Technologies had partnered with Coldwell Industries on what appeared to be a revolutionary green energy project for the port. But Alexis had uncovered evidence that the technology wasn't just ineffective, it was potentially devastating to the local marine environment. A soft whine drew her attention. Buddy lay by her feet, his head tilted as he watched her work. She hadn't questioned how he'd followed her home. Somehow, his presence felt right. "You knew all along, didn't you?" she murmured to the dog. "You were helping her leave the clues." Her phone rang, startling them both. Fernanda Coldwell's name flashed on the screen. "Mrs. Coldwell." "Someone broke into our house." Fernanda's voice trembled. "Mark's office. They were looking for something specific. The police say it was probably teenagers, but..." She paused. "Karen, I found something. Can you come over?" 20 minutes later, Karen stood in the Coldwells' study, watching as Fernanda pulled a small jewelry box from behind a loose panel in the fireplace. "Alexis showed me this hiding place when she was 12, Fernanda explained, opening the box. Inside was a single butterfly hairpin and a handwritten note. "I found this the day after she left. I couldn't bring myself to read it until now." Karen carefully unfolded the note, recognizing Alexis's handwriting. "Dear Mom, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Please understand, this was the only way to protect everyone. Dad's company is being used as a front for something dangerous, but he's as much a victim as anyone. The proof is in the numbers, in the patterns I discovered. The butterfly you gave me on my 16th birthday taught me something important. Transformation isn't just about changing yourself, it's about changing the world around you. Sometimes, the bravest thing we can do is let go of who we were to become who we need to be. I'm safe. Buddy will watch over you until it's time. Trust in the butterflies. Love always, Alexis." Fernanda's hands shook as she took back the note. "All this time, I thought..." The accident seemed so real. The investigators found her car, the evidence of the fire. "But no body," Karen finished softly. "Mrs. Coldwell, I believe Alexis staged everything to protect your family while she gathered evidence. The question is, evidence of what?" Before Fernanda could respond, they heard the front door open. Mark Coldwell's voice echoed from the hallway, along with another familiar one, Robert Aldridge. "Quick," Fernanda whispered, ushering Karen toward a hidden door panel behind a bookcase. "This leads to the garden. Go!" Karen slipped through the panel just as footsteps entered the study. Through the thin wall, she could hear the conversation clearly. "The board meeting is tomorrow, Mark," Aldridge was saying. "Once the vote passes, Project Chrysalis goes live. Everything we've worked for. I've been reviewing the technical specifications." Mark's voice held an edge Karen hadn't heard before. "The numbers don't add up, Robert. These efficiency ratings, they're impossible. Trust the process, Mark. Your daughter's disappearance has you questioning everything, but..." "Leave Alexis out of this," Mark snapped. "She has nothing to do with..." "Doesn't she?" Aldridge's tone turned cold. "Go, it's interesting how certain documents went missing right before her accident. Documents that could have raised uncomfortable questions about our project." The conversation faded as they moved deeper into the house. Karen waited a few minutes before slipping out into the rain-soaked garden. Her mind was racing with new questions. The board meeting tomorrow. It had to be significant. But why was Aldridge so concerned about those missing documents? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Tomorrow at sunset. The truth emerges with the tide. Bring the butterfly pin." Attached was a photo of the old harbor warehouse she'd seen in the previous image. The same window, the same butterfly decal catching the light. As Karen hurried to her car, she spotted Buddy sitting alertly across the street. But this time, he wasn't alone. Next to him stood a hooded figure who quickly disappeared into the shadows. Karen's heart pounded. For a brief moment, she could have sworn she saw a familiar butterfly hairpin glinting in the streetlight. The pieces were falling into place, but time was running out. Tomorrow's board meeting wasn't just about a corporate vote. It was about exposure, transformation, and the emergence of long-buried truths. And somewhere in the shadows, Alexis Coldwell was preparing to complete her final metamorphosis. The old harbor warehouse loomed against the setting sun, its weathered walls painted in shades of orange and gold. Karen checked her watch, 6:45 p.m. The board meeting at Coldwell Industries would be ending soon, and according to her sources, the vote on Project Chrysalis had been unanimous. Buddy sat beside her car, his attention fixed on the warehouse's upper windows where the butterfly decal caught the fading light. They'd been waiting for 15 minutes, watching as port workers finished their shifts and headed home, leaving the area eerily quiet. Karen touched the butterfly hairpin in her pocket, remembering Fernanda's words from their hurried phone conversation earlier. "There's something else you should know. The day before Alexis disappeared, she transferred all her company shares to a trust. The paperwork was dated to be executed today." The implications were staggering. If Alexis still owned voting shares in Coldwell Industries, today's board decision could be challenged, but only if she was alive to claim them. A soft whine from Buddy drew her attention. The dog had risen, ears perked toward the warehouse's side entrance. A figure in a dark hoodie slipped inside, leaving the door slightly ajar. Karen's heart raced, the same silhouette she'd glimpsed outside the Coldwell mansion. "Stay here," she whispered to Buddy, but the dog ignored her, padding silently beside her as she approached the entrance. The warehouse interior was a maze of old shipping containers and forgotten machinery. Sunlight streamed through high windows, creating long shadows that seemed to move with each passing cloud. Karen's footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as she followed a path that had been cleared between the containers. A voice called out from above, familiar yet changed by time and circumstance. "You figured it out." Alexis Coldwell emerged from behind a container on the upper level, no longer hiding beneath a hood. 2 years had altered her appearance subtly. Her hair was shorter, her face more angular, but her eyes held the same determined intelligence Karen had seen in old photographs. "The butterfly clues," Karen said, climbing the metal stairs to the upper level. "They weren't just about leading someone to you. They were breadcrumbs for the right person to find the truth about Project Chrysalis." Alexis nodded, moving to a makeshift workspace filled with computers and documents. "I needed someone who would understand, who would see the pattern. When I saw you watching Buddy at my grave, I knew you were the one." "Why not just expose the project's flaws directly?" Karen asked, taking in the elaborate setup. "Why disappear?" "Because proving environmental fraud wasn't enough." Alexis turned one of the monitors toward Karen. Project Chrysalis was never about green energy. That was just the cover. Look at these shipping manifests, these equipment specifications. They're building something else entirely under the port's expansion project. Karen scanned the documents, her eyes widening. A private data center, disguised as environmental monitoring stations. But why all the secrecy? Because of what they plan to store there. Alexis pulled up another file. Financial algorithms capable of manipulating global markets, corporate secrets from hundreds of companies, personal data collected without consent. My father's company was just a respectable front, chosen because of his reputation for environmental innovation. And the board vote today finalizes the project's funding and timeline, Alexis finished. But they didn't count on one thing. She smiled, pulling out a folder. My shares in the company transferred to a trust that matured today. As of sunset, I own 26% of Coldwell Industries, enough to force a new vote and a full project review. Suddenly, Buddy growled, a low warning sound. Footsteps echoed from below. "Right on time," Alexis whispered, quickly gathering specific documents. "Karen, I need you to take these. Everything's here, the proof, the connections, the real plans, but more importantly," she pressed a final envelope into Karen's hands. "A letter to my parents. They deserve to know the whole truth." The footsteps grew closer. Robert Aldridge's voice carried up from below. "It has to be here somewhere. Find her." Alexis guided Karen to a hidden exit behind some containers. "There's a fire escape. Get to the roof." "Buddy knows where to go from there." "Come with me," Karen urged. But Alexis shook her head. "I have one more thing to do here." "Don't worry," she smiled, touching the butterfly pin on her collar. "Sometimes the best place to hide is in plain sight." As Karen climbed to the roof, she heard voices confronting Alexis below, but something in their tone had changed. Surprise, then recognition. Through a skylight, she watched as Mark Coldwell emerged from the shadows, staring at his daughter in disbelief. "It's time to come home," she heard him say, his voice breaking. "I know about Aldridge, about everything. I've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning." The sunset painted the harbor in shades of gold as Karen made her way down the building's far side, Buddy leading her through a maze of back alleys. The documents in her bag held the power to expose Project Chrysalis, but the real story of a daughter's courage and a family's redemption was still unfolding. Her phone buzzed with a final anonymous message. "The butterfly emerges when the metamorphosis is complete. The truth, like transformation, cannot be contained. Share it well." As she looked back at the warehouse, Karen saw two figures embracing in the window, a father and daughter silhouetted against the setting sun, while a third figure watched from the doorway. Fernanda had found her way there too, drawn by the same invisible threads that had connected them all. The mystery of the loyal dog and the empty grave had led to something far larger than Karen had imagined. But as she clutched the envelope containing Alexis's letter to her parents, she realized that some secrets, once revealed, had the power to heal as well as transform. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Coldwell Industries' Boardroom, illuminating an assembly that would have been impossible to imagine just 24 hours earlier. Karen sat in the observers section, notebook ready, watching as board members filed in with confused expressions. None of them had expected an emergency meeting at 7 a.m., and fewer still could have anticipated who would be leading it. Alexis Coldwell stood at the head of the conference table, her presence commanding attention. Gone was the hiding, the shadows, the secrecy. She wore a tailored business suit, her shorter hair styled professionally, and on her lapel gleamed the butterfly pin, a symbol that had transformed from a clue into a statement of rebirth. Mark Coldwell sat to her right, his face showing both pride and apprehension. Fernanda occupied the seat to his left, her eyes never leaving her daughter. The reunion at the warehouse had lasted into the night. Years of separation dissolved in tears and explanations, but now came the harder part, facing the consequences of truth. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Alexis began, her voice steady. "Yesterday you voted to approve Project Chrysalis based on incomplete and deliberately misleading information. Today, you'll learn why that vote must be invalidated." Robert Aldridge burst through the boardroom doors, his usual composure noticeably shaken. "This is irregular. She has no authority to—" "Actually, she does," Mark interrupted, sliding documents across the table. "As of sunset yesterday, my daughter's trust matured, making her the largest individual shareholder of Coldwell Industries, and as chairman of this board, I'm ceding her my time." Karen watched as Alexis activated the room's presentation screen, displaying the evidence she'd gathered over 2 years. Shipping manifests, technical specifications, environmental reports, all telling a story of systematic deception. Project Chrysalis was presented as a revolutionary green energy initiative, Alexis continued, clicking through slides. The reality is far different. Hidden within the technical specifications are plans for a massive data center designed to house and process information that could compromise global financial markets and personal privacy on an unprecedented scale. The board members leaned forward, murmuring as they reviewed the documents before them. Karen noticed how several of them pointedly avoided looking at Aldridge, whose face had grown increasingly pale. But perhaps most disturbing, Alexis pressed a button, and new images filled the screen, is what the environmental impact study deliberately concealed. The real data shows that the project would devastate local marine ecosystems and threaten the livelihoods of thousands in our coastal communities. Outside the boardroom windows, Buddy sat patiently on the building's plaza, visible from their elevated position. Several employees had gathered around him, finally meeting the mysterious dog who had maintained his vigil at the empty grave. Karen smiled, knowing that his role in the story was far from over. 2 years ago, Alexis's voice softened, I discovered these plans by accident. When I confronted Mr. Aldridge, he made it clear that this project would proceed with or without Coldwell Industries' involvement. I knew that simply opposing it wouldn't be enough. I needed irrefutable evidence. So I made the hardest decision of my life. She turned to her parents, emotion finally cracking through her professional demeanor. I staged my disappearance to protect you while I gathered proof. Every clue I left, every breadcrumb, was meant to lead to this moment. Because the truth, like a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis, can't be contained forever. Aldridge stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is corporate espionage. She stole proprietary information. Actually, Mark Coldwell's voice cut through the tension. Every document my daughter gathered came from our own servers, accessed through her legitimate credentials. If anyone committed corporate espionage, it was Aldridge Technologies when you planted false environmental data in our systems. The boardroom erupted in chaos as security personnel entered, responding to a silent signal from Mark. Karen watched as they escorted Aldridge out, his protests fading down the hallway. But the real drama was unfolding at the conference table, where board members were already calling for a new vote. As the morning light grew stronger, Karen noticed something remarkable. On the windows of surrounding buildings, butterfly decals began appearing, dozens of them, placed by employees who had learned the truth about Alexis's disappearance through an anonymous email campaign launched the night before. The symbol of her transformation had become a movement. Fernanda moved to stand beside her daughter, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. The gesture spoke volumes of forgiveness, understanding, and pride. Mark joined them, and for a moment, the three Coldwells stood united, their shadows merging in the morning sun. Karen's phone buzzed with a message from her editor. This is bigger than we thought. The story runs tomorrow, front page. But as she looked at the reunited family, she knew the real story wasn't about corporate intrigue or environmental activism. It was about a daughter's love for her family, a father's journey to redemption, and a mother's unwavering faith. The butterfly effect, indeed. One small action creating waves of transformation that would ripple out into the world. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Coldwell mansion's veranda as Karen sat with the reunited family, watching Buddy playfully chase butterflies in the restored garden. The morning's dramatic board meeting had set off a chain of events that continued to reverberate through Savannah's business community. The shareholders' response has been overwhelming, Mark said, his hand clasped with Fernanda's as they shared the porch swing. Once they understood what Project Chrysalis really meant, the support for Alexis's revelations was unanimous. Alexis sat cross-legged on the porch steps, her professional attire from the morning replaced by casual clothes that made her look more like the young woman from the photographs. It's strange, she mused, watching Buddy. For 2 years I lived in shadows, watching my family from a distance. Now being here feels almost surreal. Where did you stay all that time? Karen asked, her reporter's notebook open but untouched. This conversation was personal, not professional. I moved between small towns along the coast, Alexis explained, as Buddy trotted over to rest his head on her lap. I took odd jobs, lived simply. The hardest part was watching Buddy visit the empty grave every day, knowing Mum and Dad would see him there, wondering if they understood what his presence meant. Fernanda wiped away a tear. I think, deep down, I always knew. A mother's heart doesn't easily accept loss. When Buddy appeared at the cemetery that first day, something told me to hope. The butterfly signs were your idea. Karen gestured to the garden, where dozens of painted wooden butterflies now decorated the flowering bushes, gifts from employees and community members who had learned the truth. Alexis nodded, stroking Buddy's fur. Mom used to tell me that butterflies were nature's reminder that change, even when difficult, could be beautiful. When I found those first documents about Project Chrysalis, the symbolism seemed perfect, a false transformation hiding a darker purpose. The sound of car tires on gravel interrupted their conversation. Joseph Matthews, the cemetery caretaker, walked up the path, carrying a familiar granite butterfly ornament, the one from Alexis's headstone. Thought you might want this, he said, placing it carefully on the steps. Tao seems right, it should be here, not there. You knew, didn't you? Karen asked him. About Alexis being alive. Joseph's weathered face crinkled in a smile. Let's just say I've seen enough in my years to know that some graves hold secrets instead of sorrows. Buddy helped me understand which kind this was. The mention of secrets brought a more serious expression to Mark's face. The FBI's investigation into Aldridge Technologies is expanding. They've found connections to other companies, other projects like Chrysalis. What you uncovered, Alexis, it was just the tip of the iceberg. That's why I couldn't just come forward immediately, Alexis explained, her expression thoughtful. I needed to understand the full scope, to make sure when we exposed it, it couldn't be dismissed or covered up. Every butterfly decal I placed, every coded message I left, was building toward that moment in the boardroom. Fernanda rose from the swing, walking to the garden to pick up a small watering can. As she tended to the flowers, she began humming a familiar lullaby, the same one she used to sing to Alexis as a child. The simple act seemed to release something in her daughter, who finally allowed herself to cry. "I missed so much," Alexis whispered, as her mother quickly returned to embrace her. But watching from afar, I saw things I might have missed otherwise. I saw how Dad fought against Aldridge's influence once he began to suspect the truth. I saw how Mom never gave up hope. I saw our community come together around a mystery they didn't even fully understand. Karen closed her notebook, understanding that some moments shouldn't be recorded, only remembered. The story would be published tomorrow, a tale of corporate accountability, environmental protection, and the power of truth. But here, on this porch, she was witnessing something more intimate, a family healing, transforming, emerging stronger from its own chrysalis. Buddy barked suddenly, his attention drawn to something near the garden gate. There, catching the late afternoon light, a cluster of real butterflies had gathered around the flowering bushes Fernanda had planted during Alexis's absence. Monarch butterflies, their orange and black wings stunning against the greenery. "They're migrating," Alexis explained, standing to watch them, returning home after their own transformation. The symbolism wasn't lost on any of them. As the sun began to set, casting the garden in shades of gold and amber, Karen realized that while the big story might be about corporate intrigue and environmental justice, the real story, the one that would stay with her, was about faith, patience, and the invisible threads that keep families connected even when they seem lost to each other. The Savannah Herald's front-page story hit newsstands early Monday morning, and by noon, the city was buzzing with conversation. Karen watched from her favorite coffee shop as people gathered in small groups, discussing the revelations about Project Chrysalis and the extraordinary tale of Alexis Coldwell's transformation. The headline read, "The Butterfly Effect: How One Woman's Courage Transformed a Community," with a photo of the Coldwell family, their first public appearance together, standing in front of the company headquarters. In the background, hundreds of butterfly decals sparkled on the building's windows, each one placed by an employee showing solidarity. "Your story has changed everything," Sarah, the bank teller who had helped Karen access the safety deposit box, said as she joined her at the cafe. "The whole city feels different somehow, more awake." Karen nodded, watching as Buddy trotted past the window, now accompanied by both Alexis and Fernanda. The sight of them walking openly together still brought smiles to passers-by who recognized them from the newspaper. "The transformation goes beyond just the Coldwells," Karen replied, opening her laptop to show Sarah the flood of emails she'd received. "Look at this." The screen displayed messages from environmental groups, corporate whistleblowers, and community organizations across the country. Alexis's story had struck a chord, inspiring others to examine their own companies, environmental practices, and corporate accountability. Inside the Coldwell mansion, change was also blooming. The study, once Mark's solitary refuge, had been transformed into a shared family space. Maps and documents covered the walls, but now they tracked something very different: the locations of every butterfly decal Alexis had placed during her 2-year absence, creating a constellation of hope across the city. "Each one represents a person who helped me," Alexis explained to Karen later that afternoon as they added pins to the map. The lighthouse keeper, the bank teller, the cemetery caretaker, they all played a part even if they didn't know it at the time. Fernanda entered carrying a dusty box she'd found in the attic. Inside were Alexis's childhood journals, filled with drawings of butterflies and early signs of her investigative nature. "You were always asking questions," her mother smiled, always looking beneath the surface. Mark joined them, carrying architectural plans. "The board approved our new proposal this morning," he announced. "We're converting the Project Chrysalis infrastructure into a genuine environmental research center. Real-time ocean monitoring, sustainable energy development, everything we claimed to be doing before, but this time it's authentic." The doorbell rang, and Joseph Matthews entered, carrying something wrapped in brown paper. "Mice found this while cleaning out the cemetery office," he said, handing it to Alexis. "Thought you might want it back." Unwrapping the package revealed an old photograph of a young Alexis with Buddy, taken at her grandmother's house years ago. The inscription on the back read, "Some guardians have wings, others have wagging tails." "I left this in the office deliberately," Alexis admitted, touching the photo gently. "So on another breadcrumb, in case someone started asking the right questions." She smiled at Karen. "I just had to wait for the right person to notice Buddy's vigil." Outside, the garden had become a gathering place for the community. The painted wooden butterflies multiplied daily as people added their own, each one carrying a message of support or a personal story of transformation. Local artists had begun incorporating butterfly motifs into their work, and a movement was growing to create a community garden in the previously abandoned lot next to the cemetery. "We're thinking of starting a foundation," Fernanda revealed, showing Karen the preliminary paperwork. "The Chrysalis Foundation, supporting environmental protection and corporate accountability. Alexis will lead it, using her experience to help others who want to make positive changes in their companies." As the afternoon light filtered through the study windows, Karen noticed something she hadn't before. The butterfly decal on Alexis's grave marker, now displayed on the study wall, caught the light in a particular way, creating a rainbow effect that spread across the room. "It's like ripples in a pond," Alexis mused, watching the light play. "Just one small action, leading to countless others. Every person who helped me, every person who believed something wasn't right with Project Chrysalis, added their own ripple to the wave." Buddy lay at her feet, his role as secret keeper transformed into that of faithful companion. He no longer needed to guard an empty grave. His vigil had served its purpose, leading to a transformation greater than anyone could have imagined. The story that had begun with a mysterious dog and an empty grave had become something far more profound, a testament to the power of truth, patience, and the courage to emerge, changed from life's darkest moments. As Karen prepared to leave, she noticed new butterfly decals appearing on the windows of buildings across the street. The symbol that had once marked a trail of breadcrumbs had become a banner of hope, a reminder that transformation was always possible, and that some mysteries, when solved, could change not just one life, but an entire community. 1 month after the revelations about Project Chrysalis, the old warehouse where Alexis had hidden her evidence underwent its own transformation. The building, purchased by the newly formed Chrysalis Foundation, was being converted into an environmental education center, its walls now adorned with vibrant murals of butterflies painted by local artists. Karen walked through the renovated space with Alexis, noting how the once shadowy corridors now filled with natural light from newly installed skylights. The makeshift workspace where they'd first met was now a state-of-the-art research laboratory, dedicated to developing genuine green technologies for the port. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much has changed," Alexis said, pausing by a window that overlooked the harbor. "A month ago, I was hiding in these shadows. Now," she gestured to a group of students touring the facility below, part of a new educational program launched by the foundation. Buddy trotted alongside them, no longer needing to maintain his cemetery vigil. He'd found a new purpose as the center's unofficial mascot, charming visitors, and somehow always knowing when someone needed a comforting presence. The latest survey results came in too, Karen shared, pulling out her tablet. Marine life is already returning to the areas where Project Chrysalis construction had begun. The ecosystem is healing itself. They reached the building's crown jewel, a rooftop garden where native plants attracted real butterflies, creating a living symbol of the transformation below. Fernanda was there, teaching a group of community volunteers about butterfly-friendly gardening practices. "Every garden we plant," Fernanda explained to her eager audience, "creates another safe haven for these beautiful creatures. Just like every truth we uncover, creates space for positive change." Mark Coldwell arrived, carrying architectural plans for the next phase of development. Under his leadership, Coldwell Industries had become a pioneer in genuine environmental innovation. The company's stock had initially dipped after the Project Chrysalis revelations, but its new direction, focused on transparency and sustainable development, had attracted a different kind of investor. "The board approved our latest proposal," he announced, spreading the plans on a garden table. "We're converting all our port facilities to run on renewable energy. Real renewable energy this time," he added with a slight smile. Karen watched as father and daughter bent over the plans together, their relationship stronger for having been tested. The past month had seen them working side by side, channeling their shared business acumen into projects that would benefit the community for generations to come. Inside the center, a wall of photographs told the story of their journey. Images of Buddy at the empty grave, the butterfly decals that had led Karen to the truth, the fateful board meeting where everything changed, each moment preserved as a reminder of how far they'd come. "We received another whistleblower contact today," Alexis shared quietly with Karen. "Another company, another project that needs investigation. But this time, we can help them do it the right way, through proper channels, with support and protection." The Chrysalis Foundation had become a beacon for corporate accountability, offering resources and guidance to employees who discovered unethical practices in their companies. The butterfly effect of Alexis's actions continued to spread, inspiring others to stand up for what was right. Fernanda joined them, carrying a familiar object, the locket that Buddy had uncovered at the grave. "I had it restored," she said, handing it to Alexis. "I thought maybe we could make it the Foundation's symbol. A reminder that some treasures are meant to be found, and some truths need time to emerge." As the afternoon sun painted the harbor in shades of gold, a group gathered in the rooftop garden for the center's first official ceremony. Community leaders, environmental activists, corporate partners, and ordinary citizens who had been touched by the story all came together to celebrate not just the opening of a building, but the birth of a movement. Karen, watching from the sidelines as she prepared to write her follow-up article, noticed something remarkable. The butterfly decals that had once served as secret markers now appeared on buildings throughout the city, each one representing a person or organization committed to positive change. The trail of breadcrumbs had become a path forward. Alexis stood at the podium, Buddy faithfully at her side, addressing the assembled crowd. But her words were more than just a speech. They were a testament to the power of transformation, both personal and collective. 2 years ago, I chose to disappear so that truth could emerge, she began, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. Today, we stand in the light together, proving that when we dare to change, we create the possibility for others to do the same. In the garden below, a cluster of monarch butterflies danced among the flowers, their wings catching the sunlight like stained glass. Nature's reminder that some journeys, no matter how difficult, lead exactly where they're meant to. The story that had begun with a mysterious dog and an empty grave had blossomed into something far more profound, a celebration of resilience, redemption, and the endless possibilities that arise when truth and transformation work hand in hand. 1 year had passed since the truth about Project Chrysalis emerged, and Savannah had bloomed with change. The morning found Karen back where it all began, the cemetery where Buddy's faithful vigil had first caught her attention. But this time, she wasn't alone. Alexis knelt beside her old grave marker, now repurposed as a memorial bench in the butterfly garden, a vibrant community space that had replaced the once neglected corner of the cemetery. The bench's inscription read, "Every ending is a new beginning. Every transformation leads us home." "It's strange," Alexis mused, running her fingers over the familiar butterfly engraving. For so long, this place represented absence, secrets, things left unsaid. Now it's full of life. The garden bustled with activity as volunteers tended to the flowering plants that attracted real butterflies. Joseph Matthews, Still the cemetery caretaker, but now also the garden's chief supervisor, guided a group of school children through the paths, teaching them about metamorphosis and renewal. Buddy, graying but still spirited, lay contentedly in the sun, occasionally wagging his tail as visitors stopped to pet him. He no longer needed to guard secrets. His role had transformed into that of a beloved community ambassador. "Sometimes I wonder," Karen said, sitting beside Alexis, "if you knew from the beginning how it would all turn out." Alexis smiled, watching as her parents approached through the garden path. Fernanda carried a basket of fresh-cut flowers, while Mark held the latest blueprints for the Chrysalis Foundation's newest project, a network of environmental education centers along the coast. "I couldn't have imagined this," Alexis admitted. "When I first discovered those documents about Project Chrysalis, I only knew I had to protect my family and the truth. Everything else, the butterfly clues, Buddy's vigil, you putting the pieces together, it all unfolded in ways I never expected." The Coldwell family had become symbols of transformation in Savannah. Their story, first told in Karen's articles, had inspired similar movements across the country. The butterfly decals that once marked Alexis's hidden trail now appeared on buildings nationwide, identifying businesses committed to environmental responsibility and corporate transparency. Fernanda joined them on the bench, arranging flowers in the garden beds. "The first support group meets today," she reminded them. "'Cause for families going through their own transformations." The Chrysalis Foundation had evolved beyond its environmental roots, offering resources for people facing all kinds of challenges that required courage and change. The butterfly had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that emergence was possible, even from the darkest cocoon. "Did you ever imagine," Mark asked, sitting beside his wife, "that your disappearance would lead to all this?" "No," Alexis replied softly, watching a monarch butterfly land on a nearby flower. "But I remember something Mom used to tell me when I was little, that butterflies don't just transform themselves, they transform the world around them. One garden, one flower at a time." Karen opened her notebook, not to write, but to remove something she'd brought for this occasion. It was the original photograph she'd found in her investigation, the one of young Alexis with Buddy at her grandmother's house. She handed it to Alexis. "Full circle," Karen said, "from a mystery I couldn't resist to a story that changed us all." The morning sun climbed higher, casting dappled light through the garden's trees. Around them, the community continued its daily dance of renewal. Children learned about metamorphosis, while their parents planted new flowers. Former corporate executives volunteered alongside environmental activists. Their old divisions transformed into shared purpose. Buddy suddenly stood, his attention drawn to a young girl standing shyly at the garden's entrance. She held a small painted butterfly, clearly intending to add it to the growing collection that adorned the garden's walls. Alexis walked over to her, kneeling to accept the butterfly. "What's your name?" "Hope," the girl replied softly. "Would you like to hear a story, Hope?" Alexis asked, gesturing to the bench where her family sat. "It's about transformation and trust, and how sometimes the most beautiful changes start with a single brave act." As Hope sat with them, other visitors gathered around. The story that had begun with a mysterious dog and an empty grave had become something more, a living testament to the power of truth, courage, and the endless possibilities that arise when we dare to transform. Karen closed her notebook for the last time, knowing that while this chapter was ending, the ripples of change would continue to spread. In gardens across the city, butterflies danced on the breeze, their wings catching sunlight like stained glass. Nature's reminder that every ending was just another beginning in disguise, and Buddy, the faithful guardian whose vigil had started it all, rested contentedly among the flowers, his mission transformed, but never truly ended. For in Savannah, they now said that if you followed the trail of butterflies with an open heart, you too might discover your own path to transformation. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Alexis, Buddy, and the transformation they inspired has touched your hearts. This tale of courage, family bonds, and positive change reminds us that every one of us has the power to make a difference. If you enjoyed this journey of metamorphosis, please subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Share your own stories of transformation in the comments below. Your experiences might inspire others to begin their own journey of change. Remember, like the butterfly effect, even the smallest action can create waves of positive change. Join us tomorrow for another inspiring story that explores the beautiful complexity of life and the power of human connection. Until then, keep spreading your wings and believing in the power of transformation.